Hi there, everybody. I am Sapna Mahadevan, your host for this wonderful, wonderful evening. And I hope that you are all having a productive day, a good day. And thanks again for joining the live today. Today, we are going to explore another newer genre in science fiction. That's what I promised you yesterday, right? So, yes, we are going to see more about the different genres that we can be writing in stories. And let me tell you that creative writing, writing stories, it's such a broad spectrum. There are so many genres that you can be choosing from, and today's episode is largely going to be based on science fiction and Gothic literature, right? So let's get started with our episode for today. Here we have our fiction story writing masterclass. Unleash the writer in you, have oodles of imagination, stir up your creativity to the best of your abilities, because we are going to need a lot of creativity today to write more about Gothic literature and about science fiction. Yes. So, more about these genres in our upcoming episode. But of course, let me first introduce you to all of the coming up segments. And here is the list of all of the activities specially curated for all of my wonderful viewers for today. Prachi, hi there. Thanks for joining me today as well. Um, yes, a big wave of hello, a warm hi to all of you for joining into the live. And I'm excited, says Joseph. Great. I think I also am really thrilled to come up every day at 6 p.m. India time and then meet all of you wonderful people here. Although through my chat box here, technology I know has come so far, isn't it? And it really feels wonderful to have a conversation going with all of you from I don't know which part of the world you're watching me in. You maybe you can write to me about that as well. The place that you're watching me from, right? Um, Okay, so yes, I am in India and I am in Mumbai. Right. Thanks a lot. Dafia says that she's watching me from the Middle East. Great. So, yes, across geographies, lovely to have all of you join in today's live. And let me tell you more about the coming up segment. Here we have the essentials, plot building pointers, like always. Today we have synonymous words where I will be letting you know on 4 to 5 words. Maybe they might be new to you. And we will also learn about similar word meanings, right? That's why it is the synonymous segment. And then of course I also have the recommendation of the day. There are a lot of fun activities as well. We have icebreaker questions coming up every now and then in our episode, and we'll get to know each other better through the icebreaker questions, right? And then of course we will be delving deeper into the topic for the day, and I will let you know what are interesting ways in which you can build up your story's plot, and how some of the expert tips can really help you in your creative writing process. Yes. So all of this and more coming up in today's episode. Let's get started with the first icebreaker question. Here it is. The first one for all of you. What do you like the most? Will it be sweet dishes or spicy recipes? So what will you kind of like incline towards? Sweet or spicy food? And I think by the time by so many of the episodes that we have had, most of the episodes we have questions related to food, and I think most of you will now be knowing that I really have a sweet tooth and I prefer sweet dishes anytime. Yes. Smiley's coming up there. Great. And sweet food is the answer that I get there for first. Wani, thanks a lot for that answer there. Spicy coming up next. Abhishek Singh. Great. Lovely. Okay, so we have a mixed bag of response again there. Sweet and spicy, both. Lovely. Um, Arna says sweet dishes. Great. So I think a mixture of all of these responses is coming up there in my chat box. And lovely to have all of your responses registered in the chat box here. Great. So let's get going now to the next segment. Spicy coming up there again. Lovely. And let's get going to the golden question: what's the genre, right? So we have here, as I told you, the broader genre for today, which is science fiction. And as we all know, science fiction is a group of stories which are all fictional in nature. That means that they all stem up from the author's imagination, and there is a lot of anticipation, a lot of speculation, because these are not set rules that are followed, right? Everything is speculative in nature. And of course, imagination is going to play a very big role here, because we are going to write about all of these stories from our creativity, from our perspective, right? And of course, since it is science fiction, we also have to have a dose of science involved in all of these fictional elements, right? So whatever is the plot that we are going to have, which comes up through our imagination, we want to have a lot of scientific concepts embedded into them. And that's why the genre as a whole is called science fiction. So there is a reference to science and its theories and concepts, right? So that's the broader genre there, science fiction. And let's move ahead to the next icebreaker question. The question that we have here is again related to food. What do we prefer? Eat a lot of grapes, fruits, that's grapes, or drink aloe vera juice, right? I think both of them are really healthy options here. But then what would you like to do? I've never tasted aloe vera juice, so I'm not sure of that. So I think I'll go in with grapes here. What about you? Tell me quickly in the chat box there. Out of these two options, what is the one that you're going to choose? Aloe vera juice or grapes? Okay, so grapes is the answer that I get there. Prachi, Varun, Joseph says he might want to try aloe vera juice. Okay, and grapes is actually the answer that's coming up there. Majority. Okay, yes, so grapes is the answer that I get there again. And I think we don't really want to go in for aloe vera juice, isn't it? Lovely. Okay. Um, Astha. Okay, so let me tell you that these are live episodes that I do every day of the week, Monday through Saturday. And I come live every day at 6 p.m. India time. The objective of these live episodes is that I want all of you to learn the art of creative writing. Yes. So there are different genres that we come up with on each of the days. And we try and explore these genres and understand how we can be writing a short story all by ourselves with the tips and the various pointers that I break out to you in these episodes, right? And of course, there are a lot of fun elements as well, along with the learning and the insights. So yes, that's what these episodes are all about. And we have different segments going actually. So when you are in the PSTV live, maybe in whichever platform you're watching this from, there is a debating vertical. So you can learn about debating, you can learn about story writing or creative writing. You can also learn about, various aspects of communication. So do check out our YouTube channel here, PlanetSpark's YouTube channel. Do subscribe to it and spread the word. Let your friends know about this. Yes, a world of treasure of knowledge that we have here. So yes, do go ahead and subscribe the page. I can see Anna telling me that she has already done that. Lovely, thumbs ups to that. Great. Yes, so that's about it, Astha. And let's move ahead into our next segment, which is the subgenre of the day, right? So I already told you about science fiction being the broader genre that we are going to look out for today. And the subgenre in science fiction is going to be Gothic science fiction. So Gothic Sci-Fi is the name of this particular genre that we are going to explore for today. And let me tell you, there is a blurring of the line between sci-fi and Gothic fiction. So sometimes they also overlap. And Gothic science fiction, it often takes conventional Gothic concepts like mythology and magic and monsters or vampires, werewolves, and all of these concepts are you know put together, they are we attempt to explain these concepts more scientifically, and that's why this genre as a whole is called Gothic sci-fi, right? So if we deal with, say, vampirism, right, then uh, whatever we write in our story will also have some scientific concepts to back this particular theme of vampires, right? So then it becomes scientific or sci-fi, Gothic sci-fi, right? So Gothic fiction in itself can also be under the broader genre of horror, if that is what you want to give to your audiences. And that is how, there is a very thin line of demarcation between Gothic fiction, science fiction, Gothic horror, or maybe Gothic sci-fi horror, right? So there is a very thin line of demarcation, and it totally depends on you as a creative writer, which is the path that you want to take. So if it is more of horror, then we term it as Gothic horror. But if it is more of scientific elements that we are trying to or attempting to explain our Gothic elements into our story, then it will be termed as Gothic sci-fi. So I do hope that you have got a better understanding of this genre here. Do give me a thumbs up or maybe a show of hand in the chat box so that I get to know if all of my audiences here are in sync with me. And then I would quickly move ahead to the next icebreaker question. Okay, so yes is the answer that I get there, and thumbs ups and emojis. Thanks a lot for that. Great, and let's move ahead to the next icebreaker question. Quite simple: books or movies? That's the question that we have here, and I, for one, would definitely like to go with books, right? So that's one of my favorite pastimes. Whenever I have time on my hands, I you can find me with a book in a cozy corner, right, somewhere in my home. And yes, that's the favorite pastime. I think all during this time in the pandemic, I have read a lot of books, thanks to small libraries around my places, which were open and which were welcoming of enthusiasts like us, right? So yes, books are really calming and assuring, and I see books come up there. Great. All of you who are in the habit of reading books, I think that's a big advantage there. Yes. So many advantages that we can think of if you are in the habit of reading books. Movies as well. Of course, it is another creative medium. And I can see again a mixed bag of responses here. Books and movies as well come up there. Great. Okay, but Astha tells me she doesn't watch horror movies. Yes, Astha. Um, we all have our own specific likings, isn't it? So this Gothic sci-fi that we are dealing with for today, of course, will have a tinge of horror there, because all of these elements that we are dealing with are going to be, dead spirits or monsters or vampires. So there is, of course, going to be horrific elements and events turn out in our story, right? And yes, let me tell you that I think books is one of the answers that comes up in majority, and I'm really glad looking at my chat box right now. Okay, lovely. So let's move ahead into the main topic for the day. We have establishing the essentials come up next. And here again, I'm going to give you three definite elements that you would want to focus on while you're writing a Gothic sci-fi. So all of these elements coming up here, the first one is about the characters. Then I have horror and scientific elements. What are those horrific and also scientific elements that you can be putting into your story? And then, of course, the setting of our story, right? So let's look at each one of them one by one. The first one is the characters, and let me tell you that the allure in this these kind of stories, like in Gothic sci-fi, the allure normally comes from supernatural characters. There are talks of ghosts and spirits and dead bodies, maybe, and even supernatural characters like vampires and werewolves, right? So all of this forms a part of our story here while we are writing a Gothic sci-fi. These are the characters that we are going to focus on, and the horror is also going to come from these characters. And of course, when we have all of these horror elements in our story, then it is a given that there are also going to be victims who are going to face these experiences firsthand, right? So a group of victims too are important elements for our characters in a Gothic sci-fi. And now that we know who are the characters that we are going to place in our story, let's also talk about the horror and the scientific elements, right? So, one of the good examples that I would like to give you here is vampirism, which is often explained as a rare blood disease where, these supernatural characters, they like to draw blood out of humans, and they are always in the lookout for their prey, right? So scientific elements can be again wrapped with the supernatural, mythical, or Gothic like concepts, and that's how this genre gets the name Gothic sci-fi, right? So again, Gothic fiction would deal with many of the concepts that you have in mythology, or some of the other concepts that we have seen work. Like, if I want to give you an example, then Gothic fiction, um, one of the popular examples of that is Dracula, or even Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where we had one of the monsters made out, right? So that's creativity to another level. And these two stories can be very, very relatable when we talk about Gothic sci-fi, right? And again, because science fiction or scientific concepts are a part of the creation of that monster in Frankenstein, right? So all of these are good examples of how we can be introducing horror and scientific elements into our stories. And apart from that, if we talk about the setting of our story, okay, so that doesn't it isn't showing up there correctly, but let me tell you that Gothic stories, they always get their tone. The tone of the story is set by carefully planning out the place in which your story takes place, right? So this is because, the setting and the atmosphere, they are going to give you the nerve wracking, unsettling feeling that we want for a Gothic horror. Yes. So, again, it could be gloomy castles, it could be creepy locations, it could be ominous climatic conditions that we are talking about. But all of this put together is going to give your readers an unsettling feeling, a nerve wracking feeling somewhere in their belly. Yes. And that's what we want our audiences to feel while they are reading a Gothic sci-fi. Yes. So one of those elements which you are going to take a lot of time to build up into your story is going to be the setting or the tone that you set for the story, the ambience of the place that the story is taking place in, right? And all of this, let me tell you, it is really imperative for your story, because that's going to, in a way, form the basis of your plot, right? So, for your audiences to feel the correct atmosphere in your story, and to for them to understand how your characters are experiencing that horror, that terrifying sense of place in your story, you need to give vivid descriptions, and you need to think about how you can be inducing those horror elements through the way of the setting in your story, right? So these are the three elements that we definitely want to focus on while we are writing a Gothic sci-fi. And with that, now I'm going to quickly move ahead to the first Google it word, which is laboratories, right? So, what do you understand by laboratory? Quickly give me an answer here in the chat box. That is quite simple. Laboratory or a lab. What do we understand by that? Any answers coming up here? Okay, so let me tell you, a lab or a laboratory is any place or any facility where, in a controlled condition, in a controlled environment, there are scientific or technological experiments that happen, right? So, research and technological advancements, any experiments that scientists do for these technological advancements, they are performed in a laboratory, which is a facility where, in a controlled environment, they can be which is also equipped with a lot of scientific equipments, right? You can be performing all of these experiments, right? So that's a laboratory. And this again could be one of the places where your story can be happening, right? So that's the first Google it word that we have for today, which is laboratory. And do check that word out in Google, and jot that word down in your Google it journal. Right now, let's move ahead to the next icebreaker question. Again, something to do with food. Today we have a lot of food questions coming up here. Strawberries or cherries? What is that one fruit that you would love? Um, Cherries is the answer that comes up here. Sweetened cherries, lovely. Yes, I think though you're talking about those sweetened cherries that we get in the market these days, right? Which we use for our cake toppings, isn't it? Yes, sweet and full of sugar syrup, right? Okay, cherries, strawberries coming up there. Strawberries again. I think strawberries are really overrated. They look wonderful and delicious, but when you take a bite, I don't think it really matches the way it looks, right? So yes, mm, that's a total cheat there. Um Right. And strawberries and cherries, both of them coming up here in the chat box. Great. So let's move ahead to some of the expert tips while writing a Gothic science fiction. And the first expert tip that I have here is that, while you're writing a Gothic sci-fi, do not be afraid to engage with the darker side of the character's psyche, especially the antagonist. So, if you have an antagonist for your story, don't be afraid to search for that antagonist in strange places. Maybe the narrator of the story itself is an antagonist, and the protagonist may work against themselves, or the antagonist may be a culture, a group of people with a similar ideology, right? So, again, it depends on how your story or how you mold your story, right? But always, while you're writing such horror elements into your story, don't be afraid to engage onto the darker side of or the psyche of your antagonist, right? It could also be a group of people that you're dealing with here. That's the first expert tip. And now for the second expert tip. In Gothic fiction, certain characters are considered archetypal, right? um, Able to hear me here? If you can give me a message that I'm audible. Yes, great. Okay. Okay. So I think I had a small technical glitch there. Okay. So let's move ahead. We were talking about the second expert tip here. That is that in Gothic fiction, certain characters can be archetypal. So these characters have a recurring place in many stories, and it's also like sometimes called tropes, which means that it is typical of a certain situation or a certain kind of a person, right? So that's the meaning of the word archetypal. And so while you're writing Gothic fiction, um, you can think about things or elements or people or characters who have a recurring place in these stories, and you can rely upon all of these elements to write your Gothic fiction. So don't think that it will sound cliched and you have to shun all of these elements there, because that's what is the point that we are trying to make here, that Gothic fiction would have certain tropes, certain archetypal elements that will have a place in each and every story. Yes. So just because a character is archetypal, it does not mean that they are necessarily cliched. Yes. So you can obviously include all of these cliched elements into your story, because that's how some of the genres work, right? So even if these elements there, if I'm talking about vampires, right, even if that element sounds to be cliched in a Gothic fiction, do not be afraid to include them or to rely upon that particular theme for your story, right? Now that is the second expert tip here. And let's move ahead to the next word in our Google It segment, which is archetypal, right? And let me tell you that the next word that we have in our Google It segment is archetypal. And the word, as I already discussed with you, archetypal would mean a person or a character or maybe a thing which is very typical of, right? So, certain kind of that you can be characterizing into a particular bucket, that is called archetypal, right? Now, try finding out how you can be using this word in a sentence, and jot that word down, archetypal, in your Google It journal. And you're going to really amplify your vocabulary with all of the words that you have in your Google It journal. It's going to form like a word repository for you, and really going to be helpful in your vocabulary building process, right? So that was the second Google It word that we had for today's episode, archetypal, which means that it is, you can maybe a place or a character or a thing which is of a certain kind, right? Typical of a place, right? Now let's move ahead to the next segment that we have here. Again, another icebreaker question: Doraemon or Shinchan? That's the question that we have here. And I think both of them are all of your favorites, but let me hear it out from you. Which of them is your favorites, Doraemon or Shinchan? Okay. Um, Doraemon coming up there, Shinchan as well. Okay, so again, mixed bag of responses here. We have both of them coming up here in my chat box. Doraemon, excuse me. Okay, so we have Doraemon and Shinchan, both of them come up there. Great. And both of them getting into some kind of a trouble or other, right? Okay, mischievous characters there. And let's move ahead to the next segment. We have the fun segment coming out next. It is the movie title trivia, and I have some pictures for you. You need to guess these popular Gothic sci-fi movie titles, right? So let me showcase the first one there. Here it is. Nothing spreads like fear. That's the tagline for that movie there. A wonderful movie, something that we will watch with weighted breath, maybe, right? And something that we can now relate to, really. Yes, so what's the name of that movie? So let me tell you that diseases also can be a part of Gothic sci-fi, because science is involved there, because we try to find a cure for that disease. And it would be Gothic if you add mythology and certain other elements into it, right? So that also can be a plot that we can explore for Gothic sci-fi. And yes, that's the correct answer. It is Contagion, right? So let's move ahead to the next one. There it is. Okay, so there is the next movie. A really scary one at that, right? What is the name of this movie? That is correct. Tomb of Ligia. And let's move ahead to the next one. Here it is. Don't know is the comment that I get there. That's okay. You can attempt to give me answers here. Okay. So let me reveal the answer. It is Daybreakers. And now for the last movie that we have in our segment for today. There it is. This is a popular one. I think you can be giving me names in the chat box. Again, adapted from a book. That is correct. It is, of course, Frankenstein. Right. I, Frankenstein, right? So let's move ahead into the next segment that we have here. Um, That's okay, Joseph. Joseph says he didn't know the answers, but that's perfectly fine. It was a fun segment that we had in between our session here. You can also let me know if you have watched any Gothic sci-fi movies or web series, or maybe read a book. Do let me know in the chat box. And let's move ahead into plotting the plot, right? So we saw some of the elements for establishing the essentials, and now let's see that if we are going to write a Gothic sci-fi, and that too horrific one, which is going to really scare the socks off our readers, then what are some of the pointers that we deliberately want to focus on, right? How we can keep our story plot engaging and interesting at the same time. So these are the three elements. The first one is the conflict, then we have the scientific and Gothic approach, and finally we also have the resolution, right? So what happens in the end, right? So the first element is all about the conflict. Let me tell you that now, just like we saw in the movie Contagion, we can be talking about an outbreak of a disease or a virus, which gives rise to this issue, and there could be superstition that could be involved in it, and scientific views, because we are going to find a cure for this disease that has spread like wildfire, right? And the problem is hard to solve, and that's why this could be one of the conflicts that we can be introducing into our story plot, right? Now, when I think about this particular conflict, which is an outbreak of a disease, right? It could be also apocalyptic in nature. We also have this a famous movie which was adapted from a book, I Am Legend. Will Smith did a wonderful job with that movie there, right? So that also had kind of like you can call it a disease, or you can call it vampirism maybe, right? So all of this put together can make an interesting plot for your story. And this is how we introduce a conflict in our story, where there are two parties, one of them who are the vampires, or if it is a disease that has sprang up, then the virus could be the one of the parties, and the other party would be people who are trying to get rid of this virus or of the vampire, right? So, and you can also add elements of superstition, mythology, and mythics into all of this plot there, to for it to become a scientific Gothic sci-fi story, right? So this is one of the elements in plotting the plot, which is going to keep it engrossing for your readers. That is the conflict, an outbreak of a disease or vampirism. And now for the second element that we have here, scientific and Gothic approach. So half of the population opines that the outbreak of the disease is due to their sins and supernatural elements maybe. So the scientific group strives to find a scientific resolution, some kind of a cure to the problem, and tries to justify it. All of this, makes it into these two buckets: scientific as well as Gothic fiction, right? So you can involve supernatural elements into it. You can think of karma playing a part, right? And that's how you can move your story forward. Yes. Now, after that plot here, scientific and Gothic approach, let's move ahead to the third element, which is the resolution, right? So every story needs to have a resolution. Finally, in the climax, we want to give our audiences a closure to the story, and the conflict gets to be resolved at the end, and proving that one group is superior than the other party, of course, and both the groups, they join hands together and solve the conflict and end up victorious, right? That's how the story ends. The scientific group runs for the cure, while the Gothic group reaches out to God, praying and picking out references from their ancient histories to find out natural cure, right? Now, this is going to turn into an interesting plot for our story here, because your audiences also will even unintentionally, they will while they are reading that story, they will take sides towards one of that group there, and all throughout the story they are going to see if their group wins or not, right? So some of them are going to go into the superstition, or into ancient mythology way, and some of them are going to go scientific, and they are going to find out scientific reasons for that outbreak of the disease, right? So that's how the resolution comes across, but both of the groups join hands together, and they finally get a resolution towards that conflict there, right? And that's how the story ends, and we give a closure to the book, right? So these were the three elements that we had in plotting the plot. And yes, that is really interesting. You might want to try writing a story in this particular genre here. Great, Akshita. Okay, so let's move ahead to the next segment, which is the Google It word ancient. Ancient would mean old. And I want all of you to Google up that word and come up with the answer and write that word down in your Google It journal. Yes. So the next word that we have here is ancient. Now let's move across to our expert tip in plotting the plot. And here is the first expert tip that we have. So it can be an introspective genre of fiction where the characters and the characterization are even more important than usual, right? So make sure that all of your characters are complex people. They are not simple at all. They have their own thinking, their own thought processes, and with their personalities and motivation, it becomes even more difficult for them to come to an agreement, right? So we can also play around with complex characterizations or character sketches that we do in the starting of the story, right? So that's one expert tip here. And the second expert tip, that is the setting of the plot and the description of the scenarios, can be a crucial part. They are going to form an imperative part of your story. Even the minute details of the olden civilizations are necessary. So you can give the descriptions of battles, of monarchy. There could be royal and civilian lifestyles that you talk about in your story. There will be either an entirely different technology, or we might have gone back to primitive times. So it again totally depends on you as a creative writer, which is the path that you want to take. What is it that stimulates you as a writer? Yes. And these are the various array of options that you have in front of you. If we talk about ancient civilizations, then you can also talk about one particular civilization there and base your story on that. So all of these are ideas that I want you to brainstorm and come up with one theme or one plot for your story, right? So these are all the expert tips that we had here for writing a Gothic sci-fi. And now let's move ahead to another Google It word, which is primitive, right? So what do you think is the meaning of the word primitive? Do give me answers in the chat box. Old is the answer that Prisha gives me here. Old would not be the correct word, but let me tell you, it would mean primitive would mean very basic or unsophisticated, right? In terms of comfort or in terms of civilization. So when we say that we go back into primitive times, that means that we are not as modern in our thought or in our technological advancement, right? So it means that it is really very basic. Yes. So that's the meaning of the word primitive. Check out the word in Google and come up with the various interpretations, and jot the word down in your Google journal, right? So with that word there, let's move ahead to the next segment that we have here. And the next segment is a fun segment, fill in the words. So I know that all of my audiences here are really listening to me intently, and you would certainly get all of the words correct in this segment here. The hint is that all the words are related to the episode that we had for today, or to the lesson that we had, right? And you need to complete all of these words in 1 minute. There are only two words that I'm going to showcase for today. So here is the first word. Fill in the blanks and find out what is that word there. Starts with A, and it is a 7-letter word. What did we learn about today? Think about the segment there. Think about all the Google It words that we had. And this word is going to be related to today's episode. Yes, and that is correct. Got a couple of answers there. Yes, it is right. It is, of course, ancient, right? And now for the second word that we have, here it is. Yes. What is this word? A 10-letter word. That's not archetypal. Okay, so let me give you that word there. It is scientific, right? So we also had sci-fi as one of the broader genres for today. Yes. So the word is scientific, and thanks a lot for attempting to give me answers here in the chat box. And let's move ahead to the recommendation of the day. It's a movie by the name Wars. That's the recommendation of the day for today's episode. And with that, we come to the end of our episode. And before I end this broadcast, I would like to quickly give you a roundup of all the lessons, of all the learnings that we have had in today's Gothic sci-fi story, right? And for you to write an interesting Gothic sci-fi story, first things first, we need to understand the essentials. So we need to prioritize and work more closely on the tone of our story, that is the setting. And we want to give a horrific setting, and maybe an ominous climatic condition can also be a part of that tone that you want to set for your story, right? And of course, the Gothic sci-fi story will have a tone which is nerve wracking for your audiences, and it is not going to be calm and serene for them. It's going to be unsettling, right? And that's how you need to create your story. Yes. And characters, again, would depend on how your story progresses. What is which mold are you going to set your story in? Yes. So there are going to be also victims in your story who are going to face that fear firsthand. And then for the horror and the scientific elements, like one of the examples that we spoke about was maybe vampirism or an outbreak of a disease. So these could be the plots that you're going to go ahead with for your story. And of course, that will be also a part of the conflict, right? And if there is an outbreak of a disease, then you can give it a scientific approach by talking about the scientific experiments that all of the scientists have done in laboratories, and how they are trying to find a cure to this problem. And how you can add Gothic into this scheme of things is by talking about maybe ancient civilizations. What is the thought processes that they had, any superstitions that people are having and experiencing because of this disease outbreak? Are they trying to think that karma is the reason behind this disease outbreak, right? So these could be the reasons, and these could be the plots by which you can be adding Gothic into your sci-fi story, right? And finally, at the ending of the story, the climax, you tie up all of the loose ends, bring a closure to your book, and give a resolution to that conflict that you have introduced into your story. Yes. So these are the plot building pointers which are going to make your story interesting and absorbing for your audiences. And with that, I would like all of you to try writing your hand at a Gothic sci-fi story. Put pen to paper, take that first initial step, and from all of the learnings that we have had in today's episode, do this project work where you draft your first Gothic sci-fi story. Yes. Arna says that's going to be interesting. Yes, Arna, you can, of course, take baby steps and write a short story for starts, and then you can maybe build up on your craft, right? So it is all about practice and perseverance. And with that, we come to the end of our episode for today. I hope you all had as much fun as I had in bringing this episode out to you. Yes. Thanks for all of those smileys and all of the love that I can see here in the chat box, and really for being a participative audience. I am Sapna Mahadevan signing out for today, and with the promise that I will be back again with a comedy genre tomorrow, right? So do stay tuned in here with me again at 6 p.m. India time. We'll see you next. And by the time I meet you next, I want all of you to have a happy time and a safe time. Bye bye.